Welcome to Short Movie Channel. Today's film begins with Brian, who works as a professional photographer specializing in capturing images of pets in his studio. We learn that he recently hired a young woman named Tanya to assist him at the studio. Tanya has feelings for Brian, but he finds her quite annoying at work. One day, Brian was conducting a photo shoot for a dog that appeared aggressive and intimidating. Suddenly, a wealthy lady enters the studio with her cat. When the dog sees the cat, he immediately charges at her and chases her around the studio, causing a huge mess. Afterward, Brian begins cleaning and tidying up the studio. Tanya stands nearby and starts talking to him, and he responds to her, clearly annoyed. Meanwhile, we are introduced to a man who turns out to be the leader of a large gang. He is Croatian but holds American citizenship. Named Flanco. Flanco was trying to convince two immigration officers, Ross and Myers, to expedite the process of obtaining a green card for his only daughter, Masha. He offered them a bribe of $100,000 each to speed up the process, but they refused and made it clear they would not accept bribes. Feeling insulted and embarrassed, Flanco scolded his assistant, Brick, for choosing the wrong officers. Brick apologized and promised to find two other immigration officers willing to carry out the task, but Flanco decided to change his approach entirely. Meanwhile, Brian, overwhelmed with stress and anxiety, visited a medical clinic. The doctor recommended acupuncture therapy, and after the session, Brian felt immediate relief and relaxation. Suddenly, armed men led by Brick and Oleg stormed into the clinic and forcibly took Brian to meet their boss, Flanco. Brian, confused and scared, asked Flanco why they had kidnapped him. Flanco explained that the woman who had visited the studio 2 days ago with her cat was his wife, and the incident where the dog attacked the cat left her devastated. The attack caused severe injuries to the cat, and since then, she had been in a deep state of depression because she loved the cat so much. Brian tried to defuse the situation by offering to pay for the cat's treatment, but Flanco rejected the idea. Instead, he revealed his plan. Brian would marry his daughter, Masha, so she could obtain a U.S. visa. Brian refused outright, stating he didn't know Masha and had never even met her. Flanco insisted, saying the marriage was just for the visa and Brian could divorce her afterward. However, he warned that during their marriage, Brian was not allowed to touch or approach her since she was already engaged to his assistant, Brick. Flanco gave Brian some time to think about the offer. Brian returned home, deeply troubled and unable to sleep as he mulled over the bizarre situation. After several days, Brian met with Flanco on his private jet and reluctantly agreed to marry Masha. Overjoyed, Flanco gave Brian an expensive ring to present to Masha on their wedding day. Later that evening, Brian went to a casino to meet Masha, following the address given to him by Brick. At first, Brian assumed Masha would resemble her parents or her friend Zoya, who he found unattractive. But when Masha arrived, Brian was stunned by her beauty and charm. The two began talking, and Masha admitted that her father had pressured her into the marriage solely to secure her visa. Brian treated her kindly and acted warmly toward her, ensuring their interactions looked convincing in case immigration officials were watching. They danced together during the meeting, but Brian quickly backed away when he noticed Brick glaring at them, his expression filled with anger. A few days later, Brian and Masha get married, holding their wedding in an incredibly luxurious hotel. Masha and Brian act naturally, as if they've known and loved each other for a long time. During the event, Tanya shows up, grabs the microphone, and freezes, looking like she's about to ruin the wedding. She claims to everyone that she's in a romantic relationship with Brian. This revelation shocks the crowd, but Flanco's security guards quickly escort her out. Brian reassures the guests that Tanya is lying, insisting he has only ever loved Masha. He then takes Masha in his arms, prompting everyone to applaud, and the wedding proceeds smoothly. Before they leave, Brian and Masha confront Flanco, warning him not to touch Masha or else it'll be the end of him. Afterward, Brian and Masha travel to the Marquesas Islands in the South Pacific to spend their honeymoon and carry on the charade. Upon arriving, they plan to take another flight to an island called Nukuhiva. However, they learn that all flights have been cancelled due to bad weather, with the next flight scheduled for 11 a.m. the following day. A hotel staff member introduces them to a man named Cruz, who specializes in private flights to the island. They agree to his terms, board his plane, and take off despite the rough weather and dark, looming clouds. As the turbulence worsens, Masha and Brian become terrified. Suddenly, about 10 minutes into the flight, the plane's engine fails. Cruz manages to regain control and performs an emergency landing in the area. He tells them, "Welcome to Nukuhiva," and then drives them to their resort in his old Jeep. Once they settle into their room, they talk. It's revealed that Masha doesn't love Brian and only married him because her father, Flanco, forced her to. She tells Brian that once she gets her visa, she plans to open a dance school for kids. They continue chatting and even joke around together. Brian thanks her for suggesting they come here since he loves wildlife photography. That evening, Brian heads to the hotel lobby but feels uncomfortable sitting alone while all the couples around him are enjoying their time together. He meets a woman named Lonnie, who works at the hotel, and they dance together. Unfortunately, Masha sees them and becomes furious. She confronts Brian, saying, "We're married, yes, but this isn't fair to me. Dancing with another woman on our first night together is disrespectful." Brian regrets his actions and tries to apologize, but Masha storms off. Meanwhile, back in the city, Brick tells Flanco he's planning to follow Brian and Masha to keep an eye on them because he doesn't trust Brian. The next morning, Lonnie sees Brian sitting alone and guesses he had an argument with Masha after dancing with her the previous night. She gives him a map to a romantic and picturesque spot on the island, suggesting he take Masha there to apologize and spend some quality time together. Brian agrees and heads to the location with Masha. When they arrive, they find a beautiful, enchanting lake. Brian excitedly jumps into the water, leaving his clothes on the shore. Masha playfully hides his clothes in the forest as a joke. Suddenly, two masked men appear, attack Masha, and abduct her. Brian, unaware of what's happening, returns to the hotel wrapped in leaves and assumes Masha has gone back to their room. However, Lonnie tells him she hasn't seen Masha and suggests checking their suite. Meanwhile, Brick arrives at the island as well. When Brian enters the suite, he finds Tanya lying on the bed, flirting with him. She tries to seduce him, claiming she loves him and wants to be with him. At that moment, Brian's phone rings. It's Masha. However, a man speaks on the other end, informing Brian that they've kidnapped Masha and are demanding $10 million as ransom, with a deadline of 6 a.m. the day after tomorrow. It's revealed that Masha's kidnappers are Russians working with a man named Mayer and U.S. Immigration. Lonnie shows up at Brian's room, and he explains that Masha was kidnapped at the lake. When Lonnie sees Tanya on the bed, Tanya declares herself Brian's lover. Brian, frustrated, tells her to shut up because he's dealing with a crisis. Meanwhile, one of Brick's men tells him that Brian and Masha went to the lake together, but Brian returned alone, dressed strangely. Brick gets angry, assuming Brian has broken their agreement and started a romantic relationship with Masha. Brian considers telling Flanco about the situation and asking him for the ransom money. However, he knows this could end badly, as Flanco would lose control if he found out his only daughter had been kidnapped. Lonnie offers to help Brian rescue Masha, suggesting that they search the small island together, as they're likely to find her quickly. She promises that if they succeed, Masha will see Brian as a hero and fall in love with him for real. Torn and unsure, Brian agrees to her plan. At that moment, Brick knocks on the door. Brian quickly helps Lonnie and Tanya escape through the balcony before answering it. As soon as Brick opens the door, he punches Brian directly. Brian is terrified and panicked, trying to explain himself by telling Brick that Masha is at the swimming pool. However, when Brick checks the pool, Masha is nowhere to be found. On his way back, Brick encounters Tanya and recognizes her as the person who previously tried to ruin the wedding. He grabs her, threatens her, and demands to know where Masha is. Tanya admits that Masha has been kidnapped. Brick storms back to Brian's suite, his eyes blazing with anger, but Brian is already gone. At this point, Lonnie's cousin arrives to help out. Meanwhile, Brian discovers that Cruz, the man who flew them to the resort in his plane and brought them in his old Jeep, might be able to assist them. Shortly after, Tanya arrives in a state of panic, telling them that Brick knows everything and is hunting for Brian. Brick eventually catches up with them and fires his gun at Brian, forcing them to run. They quickly jump into a car, and Cruz takes over, driving at top speed. Brick chases after them in another vehicle, relentlessly firing his gun. While the rest of the group is frightened, Cruz remains calm and composed, even returning fire at Brick until he runs out of bullets. With remarkable skill, Cruz continues driving through the forest and successfully evades Brick. The group celebrates Cruz's bravery and quick thinking in saving them. During this time, Tanya begins to admire Cruz for his courage and intelligence, even flirting with him a little. Eventually, they reach Cruz's old helicopter and climb aboard. Because of the helicopter's age, it takes a while for the engines to start. As they prepare for takeoff, Brick approaches quickly. At the last moment, Cruz manages to get the helicopter running and takes off just in time. Brick continues firing at them, but his efforts are futile, and they escape. Brick then calls Flanco and updates him on everything, revealing that Brian deceived them, had an affair with Masha, and that she was kidnapped in the forest. Meanwhile, Russ and Maze arrive at the wooden cabin where they plan to hold Masha captive. They park their car and cover it to avoid drawing attention. Although Brian's helicopter flies over the area, they fail to notice the cabin where Masha is being held. Before nightfall, Brian and his group land on the beach to rest, eat, and drink before continuing their search. Brian is deeply distressed, knowing he has only one day left to rescue Masha before 6 a.m. the day after tomorrow. Lonnie suggests they check the fisherman's village on the island the next morning, convinced that they will find Masha there. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Masha is shown tied up and restrained. Maze takes her wedding ring, but she kicks him and screams for help. However, no one hears her cries. Russ enters, yells at her to shut up, and warns her not to make any noise. The next morning, Brian and his group arrive at the fisherman's village. The locals inform them that they saw two foreign men, who looked American, driving a car toward the mountain. Brian calls Flanco and promises to do everything he can to save Masha, expressing his true love for her. He asks Flanco to deposit $10 million into his account in case they need to pay the kidnappers' ransom if they fail to find her by 6 p.m. Brian takes Cruz's gun, determined to face the danger alone and rescue Masha no matter what. At this point, Brick is driving his car to the fishing village. He calls someone and says, "I'm sure Brian is the one behind all this to get the $10 million. Meanwhile, the immigration agents who kidnapped Masha are talking with their boss. It turns out he's the one who ordered Masha to be kidnapped. We find out that Brick orchestrated everything to get the $1 million from Flanco. At the same time, he wanted to make himself look like a hero who saved her from her captors. This way, he'd win her heart, and she'd fall in love with him." Masha manages to free herself, but she's still locked in the room. She finds some chemicals, mixes them together, and calls out, saying she urgently needs to use the restroom. When Myers opens the door, she throws the chemical mixture in his face and hits him hard with the bucket. Myers screams in pain. When Ross comes to check what's happening, Masha hits him on the head with a snowboard, knocking him to the ground. At the same time, Brick reaches Cruz and Tanya. He knocks Cruz unconscious and grabs Tanya, threatening her and demanding to know where Brian is. She tells him Brian went to the mountain to save Masha before passing out. Brick hurries to the mountain, while Cruz wakes up and, along with Annie, rushes to get on a plane to reach Brian and Masha on the mountain before Brick does. Meanwhile, Ross and Myers recover, get in their jeep, and head out to find Masha and capture her again. Masha calls Brian and tells him she's currently on the main road near the mountain and has escaped her captors. Brian arrives at the location where Masha was held and finds their wedding ring on the ground. As he's leaving, he spots Brick arriving at the scene, armed with a rifle. Brian quickly hides before Brick sees him. Brick calls Ross and Myers, telling them Masha escaped and they're searching for her. Brian overhears everything and realizes Brick was behind Masha's kidnapping. Unfortunately for Brian, his phone rings, and Brick starts shooting at him. Brian hides, dodging the gunfire. Although Brian has a gun, he doesn't know how to use it since he's never handled a weapon before. He runs, using the terrain to his advantage, and manages to steal Brick's car to escape. Meanwhile, Ross and Myers catch up with Masha and chase her to a high cliff above a river. Masha successfully pushes Myers off the cliff, then rushes to the main road, where Brian arrives in the stolen car. She gets in, and they drive off quickly. Ross shoots at them, damaging the car's engine, which catches fire. Brian loses control of the car, and it crashes down the side of the road. Brian and Masha escape the car and head to the river, where they find a wooden boat and use it to cross to the other side. While they're crossing, Masha's father Flanco calls her, but her phone falls into the water. Suddenly Myers, who had fallen off the cliff earlier, reappears. Brian uses a paddle to knock him out, and they continue their escape until they reach a village on the other side of the river. The villagers welcome them, offering food and water. That night, they host a celebration with singing and dancing. During the festivities, Brian hugs and dances with Masha. She gazes at him lovingly, clearly starting to fall for him too. The next morning, as they have breakfast with the village chief, Brick and Ross arrive, shooting at everyone. Brian and Masha escape by sliding down a steep hill using a large banana leaf. At the bottom, they find themselves by the ocean, where Myers confronts them with a gun. Suddenly, Brick appears and shoots Myers, killing him, in an attempt to make Masha think he's her savior and a hero. But Masha tells him, "I know everything, and I know you're the one who planned all this." Brick admits he did it all to get the money and secure their future together after they got married. Masha responds, "Even if you were the last man on earth, I would never marry you." Furious, Brick points his gun at Brian, but at that moment, Cruz and Annie arrive in a helicopter. Brick tries to board the helicopter, but Brian seizes the opportunity to tackle him. The two fight, but Brick is stronger and beats Brian severely. Just then, Masha grabs a gun and shoots Brick, causing him to fall off a high cliff. However, he drags Brian down with him. Brick lands on a rock and dies, but Brian falls into the water. Brian resurfaces, shouting and waving to Masha, who is overjoyed to see that he's alive. They board the helicopter with Cruz and Annie and return to the resort. Upon their arrival, Flanco's men are waiting and beat Brian severely. One of them even points a gun at Brian. Flanco arrives, furious, believing Brian kidnapped Masha, as Brick had told him. However, Masha reveals the truth, explaining that Brick and his men were the ones who kidnapped her, and Brian saved her. Flanco stops his men, thanks Brian for rescuing his only daughter, and asks him to remain married to her. But Brian, feeling hurt and humiliated by Flanco's men, returns the wedding ring to Masha, saying, "I can't marry someone whose family treats me like this." He leaves and returns to his normal life, working at his animal photography studio. Despite everything, he can't stop thinking about Masha, and she can't forget him either. One day, as Masha returns home, she finds a bottle of her favorite wine wrapped in a red ribbon at her door. It's the same wine she drank with Brian on their first day together at the resort. She also sees the villagers who welcomed them, singing the romantic song she danced to with Brian. Even Cruz and Annie are there. Brian shows up and asks Masha to give their relationship another chance. Overwhelmed with joy, Masha runs to him, and they hug. It's clear they will live happily ever after. And that's the end of today's movie. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.